Can you splay the toes? Can you lift the big toe independently? Do you have a good range of motion in the ankle, right? Dorsiflexion, tibial rotation, all these things. But then where the magic really happens is when we can take the function and strength of the foot and we can translate that up the chain.
Welcome to the Flexi podcast by Lemay Lab, dedicated to elite performance, movement, longevity, and the science and stories behind extraordinary bodies. I'm Erika Lemay, founder of Lemay Lab and a performance artist myself. Today I get to talk with Heidi Van Mastrigt, a strength coach and movement specialist with over 14 years of experience in the fitness and performance world. After beginning as a competitive dancer and later competing in powerlifting, recurring injuries led Heidi to question traditional training approaches and explore the role of foot function and whole body movement. Today, she specializes in helping athletes restore resilient movement patterns through foot strength, fascial integration, and progressive strength training. She's also a NASM certified personal trainer and corrective exercise specialist and founder of Barefoot Strength and Performance. Let's welcome Heidi. Heidi, welcome to the Flexi podcast.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
You grew up dancing 10 to 20 hours a week and pushing your body to its limit, really. When that chapter suddenly changed in your life, how did that moment change the way you look at the body?
Oh man. I definitely went through an identity crisis like most people do. I went through my own ups and downs with my body and how my body changed through that. And when I stopped dancing, I really had no direction. And it wasn't until I got into powerlifting, which is on the total opposite end of the spectrum of dance, right? But it wasn't until I found that I started to just regain my confidence and regain that fire for movement again. Um, so yeah, and the biggest thing that happened within all of that was the foot that I broke. I broke my foot when I was really at the peak of my dance career. I was 18. It was 2 weeks before competition was starting. I rolled my foot, inverted ankle roll, and my fifth metatarsal just cracked. So it took a long time for me to appreciate my feet. Even, it took years after that break for me to even realize that your feet are important. But that was really like the big pivotal moment within dance, within my history, and why I'm here today.
Did you already start to focus really on foot training at that moment, or it took you more years to realize how feet are important?
It took me years. It took me so long. It actually, people come to me because of feet, obviously. That's like what I specialize in and what I have spent so many hours studying and implementing in training with clients, with myself. But the funny thing is, I did not pursue feet and foot function because of foot pain. I actually didn't really have foot pain. So and I think that's why it took me so long to connect those dots, because the real reason that I pursued my feet is because I kept hitting walls in my progress with powerlifting, and I had pain in my hip and in my neck and my shoulder. And it took me a long time to connect those dots because I broke my left foot and it was my right hip and my right neck that was in pain. And so I went to a lot of professionals. I went to great people, great at what they do. PTs, chiropractors, massage therapists, corrective exercise. I was also a corrective exercise specialist at this time as well. I got that certification and, committed to that in 2012. So when all of like the pain and everything started showing up. That was like 2016, 15, 16. So I went to all these great people, but I just never got results. I never had relief. I was never able to move past those plateaus that I was experiencing. And it took a long time. It really wasn't until like 2018, maybe, that I made the connection. And it was actually anatomy trains. Are you familiar with anatomy trains?
Tell me more.
So anatomy trains is essentially, it shows different fascial lines, fascial meridians in the body. And that was the thing that just made the big light bulb go off in my head of like, oh my goodness, it is my foot. My foot is the reason all of this is happening. And so I dove real deep into anatomy trains, into Tom Meyer's work. And from there, I revisited some of like my own like educational history in fitness, in human movement, in the body, physiology, anatomy, all those things. I've taken really high level courses in these subjects. I've taken a lot of different certifications. And so I was like, I must have missed it. I must have just,
Yeah, that's
right? Like,
so interesting what you said, because you went to see, you had a problem, you went to see a lot of great specialists, and they probably had a lot to offer, but I think that expert specialists often lack a more holistic approach, like a more global approach, and it must be so difficult for people who don't have an understanding and like the whole body to even have a clue of what's going on, because as we know, where it hurts is not always where the problem is. So then we need to start studying ourselves or having someone doing it in our life, which is difficult to find. It's good that you could do that for yourself. Did you at this moment already, like after all of your studies and knowledge on the feet and the fascia, and I want to talk about, really dive deeper into fascia later, but did you already start to prioritize the minimalistic footwear?
I was actually introduced to barefoot shoes back when they had their first big boom in the early 2010s. And ironically, I worked at a comfort shoe store. That was my first job ever. So as like a 17-year-old, I was learning about arch support and just all the different comfort shoe brands. And working there, we got in a shipment of Vibram Five Fingers, the toe shoes. So that's where I was actually first introduced to them. And I got a pair because I put them on and I was like, oh, these are amazing. Again, not knowing anything about feet, right? So I was training in those for some years in the early 2010s. As I got into powerlifting and more functional training in the middle of that, I wasn't wearing barefoot shoes. And it wasn't until I probably when I had my daughter in 2019 where I made the commitment and I said, you know what, I'm going to wear barefoot shoes and as much as I can. At the time, I didn't I one, they weren't as popular, right? You can find so many brands nowadays. And even Vibram Five Fingers, they kind of went away, right? Couldn't find them in stores. They're just not as well known as they once were. And so I had a period of time, like in powerlifting, I was wearing Converse. When I would run in the early like 2020, 2021, I was wearing Nikes. Uh, because that's just what I had. And I just didn't really, I knew I didn't want to run in minimalist shoes, right? At that time, I knew it would hurt.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it takes a long time. It takes training. It takes addressing dysfunction in order to run barefoot or run in minimalist shoes, right? That's the biggest mistake people make is they see the advertisement and they say, oh, that's going to solve my problems. And for some reason, the first thing people think is, I'm going to run in those. I don't know why, but that's usually what people say, right? They'll see me in my shoes, in my toe shoes, and they're like, "So are those good for running?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how much time do you have? Like, I need to sit here and give you a whole 30-minute lecture on this because yeah, they're great for running with the caveat if your feet are strong, functioning well connected to the hips. So that's why I wasn't running in those. Okay. But once I hit like 2022, 23, and I made the full switch, I ditched everything. I threw everything away, donated everything that I had, and was down to like 3 pairs of shoes that were barefoot shoes. And I mean, obviously, I've built from there, but I've built back up to running. I mean, I can run totally barefoot on concrete if I wanted to, if I needed to. I don't because running's just not my thing. But my feet are definitely well functioning and strong enough to handle it at this point. But it's not for everyone. That's for
Very
sure.
happy that you addressed that right away because that's my experience to see people jumping into the barefoot shoes, and then of course they get tons of injuries because they're not ready. That two questions. So number one, when is it appropriate to use highly cushioned footwear? And
Hmm.
kind of a sub question would be, what if someone has nerve issues and need thicker soles to walk or insoles? Do you still think that they should move towards the barefoot footwear, but it takes longer?
Yeah, great questions. I think highly cushioned footwear has a place in trauma. If there's been trauma to the feet, whether it's an injury, whether it's surgery, of course, we need to provide some level of support and cushion and all of these things to make sure that people can go about their daily lives, right? However, the problem is most people get stuck there. And the reality is the feet are no different than any other part of the body. And if we, for example, if we put a back brace on because we had back pain, and then we said, well, I'm just going to continue wearing this back brace for the rest of my life. What happens if you decide to take it off? And then, I mean, God forbid you try to go for like a hike or a run, right? You'd be in so much pain, definitely an injury waiting to happen, right? So the feet are no different in that sense. So when it comes to cushion, of course, there's a time and place for it. And in addition to trauma or an injury or surgery or whatnot, even cases where, maybe you work on concrete, maybe you work 12, 16-hour days, and you don't have the opportunity to take your shoes off or get some variety in a very texture or terrain, right? That's really what the feet need is variety in texture and terrain to keep from getting achy, that like achy, heavy feeling that we get in our feet, right? To prevent that or to make it less achy, texture and terrain are the solution, right? But in cases, I mean, yeah, some people are going to need to put on some cushioned shoes just to make sure that they can get their job done, right?
Yeah, or that they can put one foot in front of another.
Exactly.
I think you explained it very, very well, very understandable for everyone, and thank you for that. What are the most common causes, according, like in your practice, of foot pain today?
Sedentary lifestyle
Yeah.
and shoes. It really depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about general population, it's a sedentary lifestyle. It's a sedentary lifestyle in addition to the highly cushioned high-tech shoes, right? We are putting these highly cushioned, rigid shoes on toddlers as soon as they can walk. And then that's all they wear their whole life. So then, we get to adulthood and we wonder why, oh my gosh, my feet are so weak. I can't even walk barefoot without pain or plantar fasciitis flaring up or, whatever it may be. Now, with athletes, a lot of that comes down to their shoes. And that is because, unfortunately, most shoes are very narrow and they have tapered toe boxes, right? So if we look at, I always tell people, look at a baby's foot. Just Google baby foot, okay? And what you'll see is a narrow heel and it gradually gets wider and wider. And the widest part of a baby's foot are their toes, okay? Now, you compare that to an adult who's been wearing conventional shoes their whole life, or even more so, an athlete who has been, maybe they've been wearing cleats, or maybe they've been wearing running shoes or spikes, right? Whatever it may be. The reality is those shoes are very narrow and tapered and most of the time rigid as well. And what ends up happening is people end up with shoe-shaped feet. So their toes end up deforming to accommodate the shoe, right? And the toes are no longer the widest part of our foot, right? And so we kind of live in a society that's normalized that. So people think it's actually normal to have toes that are more narrow. And what is actually the widest is the joint, which is not good. Right? That's not good. The toes should actually be the widest part of the foot.
You just made me think of a ballerina's foot inside the point shoe, which is like the most extreme
Yes.
situation for that, is just bringing everything like that and putting your whole weight and jumping, turning on this. I'd like to
Yeah.
move towards athletes in general and your practice. So you often speak about integration in the context of injury recovery. What does that integration actually mean in practice?
Integration means that we are integrating movement from the ground up. So we are taking into consideration how the foot is functioning on its own, right? We're looking at, can you splay the toes? Can you lift the big toe independently? Do you have a good range of motion in the ankle, right? Dorsiflexion, tibial rotation, all these things. But then where the magic really happens is when we can take the function and strength of the foot and we can translate that up the chain. So oftentimes, and I see this a lot with athletes as well, is there's just a really big disconnection from the feet to the hips. And the most common thing that happens there is knee pain, right? Like if you've got knee pain, odds are your feet and your hips are weak. Okay. Now, of course, other things come up as well. Like it could be hip pain, it could be low back pain. I mean, the body is very complex, it's very intricate and connected, and it's a system, right? Nothing works in isolation. But that's why integration is such a key component when it comes to not just injury recovery, but also performance enhancement and longevity, right? We need to be able to access the strength of our feet so we can access the strength of our hips and our glutes too. So that's integration in a nutshell.
Super interesting. You just also made me realize some past injuries, like connecting the dots. Like something comes 2 years prior, a pain there, and then 2 years after you have the pain there, and it's all something
Yes.
new for me to study. So we established and we understand that where it hurts is not always where it's injured. And by your experience as well, you would say like knee pain, neck pain, it can come from the dysfunction of the feet. But how do you diagnose that how do you diagnose that? How do you find out that where is the culprit?
Yeah. Well, sometimes you don't,
Hmm.
right? So, and I mean, for myself, it was obvious once the dots were connected because the only true injury, the only true trauma I had experienced was that broken foot, right? So I broke the foot and then it shows up elsewhere. And now having the knowledge I do, I can look at old pictures and I can see, oh wow, yeah, my feet were so dysfunctional, super weak, definitely out of alignment, and no wonder the pain moved up, right? Now, in some cases, the if people are experiencing pain, in some cases they could have an injury like I did, and it's like, well, we've had trauma to a certain body part. Yeah, the rest of the body is going to reorganize and respond and oftentimes compensate, right? In cases where there was no injury, well, sometimes it's really hard to say, oh, it was this thing, right? And it's because the body is a system, right? Nothing works in isolation. And sometimes it's people like had an injury and don't even remember. It could have been something as simple as stubbing their toe. And it's like that's not, I wouldn't consider that an injury, right? But you stub your toe. I actually had a client a while ago that experienced this. He stubbed his toe, and this was years prior to working with him. And of course, I start working with his feet, and I can clearly see a big difference between the big toes, big toe mobility, big toe extension. So I ask, and he's like, "Oh, you know what? I stubbed this big toe." But that's not something that would come to mind as an injury, right? So in some cases, it can be challenging to say that there is one cause of a pain or a chronic issue. But oftentimes, we can trace it back to some type of injury or trauma.
That's fascinating also to me, how to connect the dots. And I find osteopathy to really be a notch further about that. And of course, as I want to enter this fascia situation, they work with the fascia, and probably like compared to everybody else that manual therapists, they are much more working with the fascia. And to me, it always created great result in understanding of my human body for myself. I want to really go into the fascial lines, which you talk about,
Mhm.
what they are and what disrupts their function.
Yeah. Well, fascial lines are just connections, right? There's bony points where we connect, and then there's the tendons, the muscles, the ligaments. And then there's clear connections throughout the body, right? There's a lateral line, there's a deep front line, a superficial back line, like there's all these different lines. But um, in terms of what did you ask?
That what disrupts their function.
What disrupts? Okay. In terms of what disrupts their function, I mean, any type of trauma. It could be, for example, the foot that I broke a bone, but the more traumatic injury to my foot was actually all of the ligaments and tendons that were strained,
Mhm.
right? And so the reality is fascia, but really tendons and ligaments take much longer to heal, right? When there's ever any trauma, it could be a tear, it could be a strain, it could be a even a bruise, right? You get hit hard enough and you're going to have some trauma to the tissue. And that tissue takes forever to heal because blood supply is not as great as everywhere else. So trauma is huge. And there's a book. I can't remember what it's called, but I think Carla Stecco, I believe she's the author, and it's all about fascia. And she has cadavers and shows the different layers and everything. And I read something in there, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but essentially what she was saying is when we cut, so anytime there's surgery, right, when we cut into the fascia, we completely disrupt that connection, right? And what happens is now, and I mean, we call this scar tissue, right? But we have scar tissue come in where that incision was, and it's no longer a smooth connection. Now it's like, imagine, all these different layers and all different directions. And what's that going to do to the connection of wherever it's at, right? It's going to disrupt it. So yeah, there's many things that can disrupt it, but the most common is trauma, injury,
It's
surgery.
interesting, surgeries, how it's downplayed. You often hear, "Oh no, nothing. There's going to be no side effect. Nothing happens." Well, wait a second. We're going to cut into you. Let's just take that as a base of
Yeah,
trauma. So, but okay, sometimes it's
absolutely.
needed. I'm not an anti-surgery. I
Totally.
think I was until I needed it badly. A judgmental young stupid lady here. Um,
Yeah.
how does neglecting the foot training affect the rest of the body in general? Like, I know it's difficult to answer that, but if you had just if there's a way of explaining it for those who will not take foot training seriously.
Well, if the feet are weak, then you have a weak foundation. We can just tie it to how we build houses, right? We don't build houses on top of sand because that's not a good foundation. We build houses on top of pillars and concrete, and we lay a foundation before we build a house, right? So the feet are no different in that sense. If we have weak feet, we can't expect to have strong calves, strong hamstrings, strong glutes. We cannot expect those muscles to function. And especially in the athletic world, we can't expect to reach our potential or continue growing our potential for strength, speed, endurance, all of those things that athletes need if the foundation is lacking and weak. So neglecting foot training, I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to necessarily train our feet, right? It's kind of an odd concept. But the reality is, with our modern day life, and we've got nothing but flat surfaces, our feet don't get a lot of variety. We stick them in cushioned shoes, we sit in chairs, we drive in a car, we sit on a train. We're not moving our bodies enough. And I really think that foot weakness and even neglecting foot training, it's just a symptom of a larger problem, right? We can say the same thing about weak hips, weak everything, right? Poor posture. All of this is the result of a mismatch of how we evolved, right, as humans, and the modern day world that we live in.
You explained it very well with the foundation. I think that for those who did not understand yet why they would need to pay attention, they just got the point.
Yeah.
You also trained athletes or former athletes who start to lose a little bit or having injuries or the body is failing them. I'd like to talk about dancers because obviously they use their feet in a crazy manner.
Mm-hmm.
What issues are most common from them? Like apart from overuse, because obviously they overuse their feet, but injuries.
Yeah. With dancers, it's probably bunions is the biggest one that I see. Beyond that, I mean, Achilles issues are very common. But with dancers specifically, the biggest problem I see is bunions.
And what does bunions, and if you can explain what it is, but also what does it create as an issue afterwards? Because I think the
Yeah.
people who are not dancers or not very in tune with their body, they just think it's an aesthetic thing that it's going like that. But can you explain what
Absolutely.
type of problems it creates?
Yeah. So a bunion is essentially when the big toe starts shifting towards the little toes, and then the metatarsal continues to go in the other direction. So we get this joint that is really unstable. Now, this is really problematic because the big toe joint it's one of the most important joints in the body because it's where we are meant to roll through when we're walking and running. Okay. If you look at a foot, the most robust joint is the big toe joint. So there's that. So our gait and how we walk is going to be altered. In addition to that, we have a lot of attachments into that first metatarsal. So fibularis longus, the outside low leg muscle, anterior tibialis, the shin muscle. Okay, these are heavy hitting muscles in the low leg that then come and connect to that first metatarsal. Now, when we have instability there, those muscles can't do their job. Okay, so in addition to your gait being altered, the foot is not going to be as stable as it needs to be. Now, the body will always adapt, right? The body is resilient and adaptable. However, when we're talking about performance longevity, when we're talking about high quality movement, well, those things are going to suffer because we're not going to be able to connect as well to those fascial lines. We're not going to be able to connect as well to the glutes. And so over time, that's why people end up in pain.
And the pain is located where? So when someone would go to consult, that what would be their main problem?
It depends. Sometimes it is in the foot, it is the bunion that hurts. Oftentimes it's the knees, because when we lose the big toe, when the big toe starts migrating towards the little ones, then that opens the door for more pronation than you should be doing. Okay. So we're going to get more movement in the foot. So that could mean maybe they're struggling with post-tibial tendon dysfunction or pain on the inside of their low leg. And then the knees. If we have more room to pronate the foot, if it pronates more than it should, then the knee also has way more room to move toward the midline or knee valgus or knee caving. And that is not great for all of those tendons and ligaments that stabilize the knee joint.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, in terms of pain, it really depends. It depends on their background, depends on what, like their own movement patterns, how long they've been dealing with it. But those are probably the most common.
Can they be reversed, these bunions, and how long does it take?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a loaded question. When it comes to bunions, it really depends. It depends on how long you've had them, how severe they are. I I have some pretty dramatic before and after pictures of my own feet and, having a pretty bad bunion on my left foot that I broke to now it's nowhere near as bad. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to tell that there was a bad bunion there. However, I think that has more to do with the fact that I've developed so much strength and I can access better ranges of motion. Not everyone is going to be able to do that, especially if they're really severe. Mine were not as severe as, you know, some people. But it doesn't mean that all hope is lost. When it comes to aesthetics, I mean, it's really the last thing we should be focusing on anyway, right? But it is a concern for people. But just because we can't change the aesthetics of a bunion or a foot or drastically change it, doesn't mean that we can't improve strength and stability in the foot and therefore in the lower body to then minimize pain, increase strength, and all that good stuff.
Then have a good functioning, even if you have this bunions. I assume also
Exactly.
the same would apply to, or maybe not, you tell me, to Morton's neuroma. I know a lot of dancers eventually get Morton's neuroma because I think of the instability over flexibility of their feet. And then just as a quick explanation for everyone, you can make a better explanation, but the nerves we have between the metatarsal, they get squeezed and then they get bigger and then there's a shooting pain. So, and that is often said to be non-reversible. I'd be very curious to have your opinion on that.
Yes. So I've never had this diagnosed, I will say that, but I do think that I have a neuroma in my left foot, one that I broke. Reason being is because in the very beginning, when I was starting to do more footwork, I was doing toe squats. So I was up on my toes, holding a kettlebell, squatting. Okay. And I got shooting pain in my left foot. And there's even like a bump. So oftentimes with neuromas, it'll feel like a little speed bump. Like you can, when you roll across the ball of the foot, you'll go like bump bump, right? So I have that as well. So it took some time and I had to train in toe spacers for years. I still put them on every now and then to this day, but I trained in toe spacers for years. I addressed my foot function and I do not have any issues with it anymore. So it's another one of those things where, well, it depends on how far have we gone on the spectrum of dysfunction, right? I've seen some pretty gnarly feet that have some pretty awful thick calluses, even bruises in like right in the center of the ball of the foot. And in those cases, I mean, we would just have to expect so much time, love, and attention on those feet. And even then, it's not guaranteed that that would work, right? But those are really extreme cases. Most of the time, what I have seen at least is people can, it's not reversing, right? We can't get rid of an aroma, but we can improve the function of the foot.
Can you
We
explain
can
what is the neuroma? It would be the thickening of the nerve?
Yeah, so it's the
Um,
thickening.
yeah.
So there's no way to get rid of a neuroma unless you have surgery. Yeah, that's true. But when we improve function of the feet and our loading pattern improves, then we're not loading where that neuroma is anymore. It becomes less of an issue or a non-issue, right? So, and that's where the big toe and the big toe joint come in and why they're so important. Because oftentimes neuromas happen because we are pushing through, we are loading that part of the foot and those metatarsals in a way that they're not meant to be loaded. And our push off is not making its way all the way to the big toe. So if we can put mobility back in the foot, right? That's really important. Space between the metatarsals, which is it's why I trained in toe spacers for so long. And if we can relearn how to engage that big toe and strengthen where that big toe joint meets the ground, then the neuroma becomes a non-issue. And that has been my personal experience and what I've seen with others as well.
Like a asymptomatic hernia that we probably have, all have one.
Yes, exactly.
People need to hear that more often, because when it comes to nerve problems, or the doctors traumatize you right away and want you to want to cut you open. What about the rehab? And the answer I personally got many times is, oh no, it's not possible to rehab that. But I could strengthen my foot. I could change the way my foot is going on the floor. I was about to ask you about the toe spacers, but no, you answered before I asked. All of these,
Yeah,
we can remove the pain in other ways. It takes longer. It takes a lot of care and love, as you said. And why don't we give that to our bodies? That would be an interesting question for medicines. And by all means, I don't want to remove the importance of medicine. It's like they're there to heal you and to make you better right away. And I know that 90% of people are not ready to put time into rehab, like the normal non-athletes. But it
yeah,
would be nice to be told that there is an alternative that we could explore.
absolutely. Yeah. And the reality is the doctors just are not trained. They don't get that training. I mean, I didn't get that training, right? I had to go and find it myself. All of this is just self-taught. I read so many books. I studied so many different diagrams and forms of the feet and then, experimented on myself, implemented with my clients. And so, you know, it's we're only scratching the surface of actually having these conversations with people and then having the experiences, the real stories of, oh yeah, like that validates, right? Oh, it is possible. This person did it. This person did it. But it's so new. I mean, training the feet, if you would have said you need to train your feet to me 10 years ago, I would have been like, what are you talking about? How do you train your feet? Right? So we're very new in this.
Yeah, and often you need to start to experience pain before starting something that you could have just spare yourself. But
Yeah,
okay.
for
Tool
sure.
and training methodology. If I have let's say I have a very weak foot, where do I start?
Pressure. That is my go-to. Deep pressure with the caveat of you just go at wherever you're at. I personally, I love the soulmate for this, but you can use anything. Use use a curb, use a tree root. Use a lacrosse ball, use a tennis ball, something that is not flat, obviously, and start massaging the feet. I mean, it's often what, most people are fairly familiar, especially if they've had a foot injury or foot pain. They're fairly familiar with using a ball to roll the foot out. But the issue is most people are rolling their foot when that's not where they're not going to get the most bang for their buck doing that, right? The most bang for your buck is actually deep pressure. So applying pressure at all points of the feet in different positions and getting those joints to move again. Most of the joints in the foot, they move like this, right? So what happens with our modern day lifestyle and cushioned, rigid shoes, we get rigid shoes and then the joints, they don't move as much,
Mm.
right? So pressure is what allows the joints to start doing this again. And what I've seen, and this probably wouldn't apply to you because your feet are so flexible, but most people, their feet are very rigid.
Mhm.
And so when they step on something that is not flat, it can cause pain, right? It sends pain signals. Well, that's because their foot is not able to form to whatever the surface is, right? The same way that I can grab, right? I have all this dexterity of my hands and my fingers. Well, our feet should be able to change shape when we step on an uneven surface as well. So that is just really low-hanging fruit for anybody. You can start getting your feet to change shape by stepping on whatever it could be, just a different level in the carpet, um, but that, and I mean, toe spacer is another really low hanging fruit because you can just put them on and that's it. you
How
know
often a day? How often? And is there a moment when it's too much?
your body will tell you for sure. Yep. Even me. I mean, it's not normal to have our toes laid like this for a long period of time, right? So your body will tell you, hey, this is turning into a medieval torture device and you need to take these off, right? So in terms of how long, it really depends. I mean, how tight are their toes, Um, and how often? I, as often as possible. I mean, at some point, you really have to move beyond the toe spacers. I say toe spacers in the beginning because it's a really easy in for people. Most people love to just buy something and you know
You don't
like,
have to
oh,
do
okay,
anything.
I don't have to do anything. I just buy this thing and I put it on and I'm good, right? Well, yes and no. It's a great place to start, especially when you're training. Now, I obviously I have a fitness and gym background. That's my second home. So I found it especially useful to train in toe spacers, to move my body in toe spacers because that pain wouldn't come on as quickly because there's more blood flow going to the toes. You're getting more movement. So I like to move in them. That you can just be passive though, and you should start there. So starting passive, putting them on, just putting your feet up while you're relaxing, and then gradually moving a little bit more just to make sure that you're not going to overdo it.
And then you start
And
to strengthen your foot. Do you have
yeah,
like tangible exercises that would apply to more or less everybody to
yeah,
start to have a stronger foot?
absolutely. Yeah. Lifting your big toe, independent of all the other ones. Okay. Most people can't do it, but we should be able to do that. It shouldn't be so hard.
Mhm.
So, an active toe splay. So, a really great beginning exercise is to sit with your feet out in front of you, actively splay the toes, reach the toes out, and then curl them in and go back and forth. And what that's going to do is one, it's probably going to be really frustrating for most people because they're going to realize, oh my gosh, I don't have that control. My brain is telling my toes to move, but something is not connecting, right? So that's a really great way to start doing that. But also, I would encourage people to see, can you lift your big toe independent of the others? And can you reach with your pinky toe out, right? We should be able to do all those things with no problem, but most people can't.
I can't. And totally feeling the frustration. I'm like, whilst you're talking, I'm trying to do these exercises here, and my brain goes like, why? I can't.
Yeah.
It's very odd, I have utmost control on every part of my body in extreme position. I can't do that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That was a reality check for me.
Yeah. And that's just the toes, right? Like that is just addressing the tip of the iceberg. Like I haven't even talked about a simple calf raise or a tib raise, right? So like going up onto the toes, engaging that calf muscle, lifting the toes up, engaging that shin muscle. Those are some heavy hitting low leg muscles that, again, most people are disconnected from and they're totally weak. So yeah, I mean, there's so much we can do, and that's something that I've loved to explore and bring to people is the creativity and how we can actually train our feet. Because one of the biggest issues I've seen, especially in mainstream physical therapy and like conventional medicine, the recovery for foot and low leg injuries is so mediocre. Eh, like our feet are so incredible. They move in all these crazy ways. We have, like it's just such a complex part of our body that in my experience, and this is no, not talking down on any of these professionals because they do a lot of what I can't and won't do too, right? But when it comes to training the toes and feet, it's just very limited. It's very just a couple things that get prescribed to everybody and then they're sent on their way and then they wonder why, well, I was running half marathons and now I can't, even though I went through PT.
I completely agree with that. And I've been seeing therapists and doctors my whole life for different problems just because I was an athlete. And
Yeah.
and that's a knowledge I do not have. And I think, like humbly, I can say that I have a lot of knowledge on the human body, but this was something a little bit left out. I knew how to have the most flexible looking feet in the world. It was the most important, but to have them strengthened, not important. Yeah,
Yeah.
surprise, surprise. What is the WEC method? How does it relate to
Oh,
movement training?
yeah. So WEC method is, well, it's by David Weck. I always call him a mad scientist because he's just genius. But sometimes you're like, what is he saying? But he's brilliant. I mean, his focus, to put it as simple as possible, is on rotational movement training. So it's all about how the body rotates and coils, as he says, and how we totally leave that out of training, and especially in the world of athletics, there's a lot of focus on like anti-rotation and stability, which I still believe there's a time and place and an importance for that. However, the incorporation of the spine and how it rotates and how that connects to different parts of the body is really important. And so if we think of like the sling, right, the obliques and the X, right, from left shoulder to right hip, vice versa, and that goes on the front, it's on the back. And then we can tie that all the way down to the feet and how the feet play a role in all of that, right? So yeah, so that's WEC method in a nutshell. But I mean, so many great concepts and new innovative ways to move the body and train, and tools as well. He's got some really great creative tools.
Thank you. We'll try to link all of the resources that you gave also during the interview because there's so much important and interesting contents here that is not heard about. Yeah.
Totally.
What would you say to someone who feels that their body is starting to fail them and it's been their greatest pride their whole life and they're highly fit and everything? Like it's the beginning of the end, or what Heidi says?
It's definitely not the beginning of the end. I feel like I've been through this myself, you know, and I feel in some ways I feel lucky that it happened to me when I was younger, because most people deal with that when they're older. And I would say that your body's not failing you. You just need to find new ways to move, new ways to strengthen, right? I think that pain signals like that are just your body saying, hey, I need a different stimulus. I need something new, right? Because oftentimes those aches and pains come from repetition, just repetitive movements. And yes, they're like, yeah, we're all going to get old and die, right? I mean, there's no escaping that. And there's ways you know, keep that youthful body in some sense, right? We can supplement, we can make sure we eat a healthy diet, we stay hydrated, we manage stress, right? Like all these things matter in that sense. But at the end of the day, we still need to give our body a variety of movement. We are not meant to just walk and be robots, right? And so that's what I would say to keep it short.
Good. We keep that part for sure. Heidi, is there anything else you'd like to share with the Flexi community? Where to find you? How can we work with you if you do also online consultation for those who are not in California?
You can find me on Instagram at that barefoot coach. I also have an app with a lot of resources for the feet. You can find that at app.thatbarefootcoach.com. And I am located in Lake Forest, California, so Orange County. I train in person at Legendary Strength Co. And in terms of people not in the area, I am working on doing some consultations in the future. And that would just be a matter of connecting with me. Whether you can send me a DM, you can send me an email at Heidi@thatbarefootcoach.com. But my primary places right now are Instagram and working in person at Legendary.
Thank you. That was extremely helpful and a lot of information that I needed to hear for myself and I'm sure for the whole community.
I'm happy to help.